What do you think about people who gaslight?
I think they're lit.
That's the joke.
Do like
Right,
a drum set right here.
Honestly, that was perfect.
Okay. How's it going?
Hey, Mitchell.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, so today we have some very special guests. I'm actually going to let you guys introduce yourselves. I think that's going to be the easiest thing.
Awesome. Okay, great. So my name is Sidnee Hedrick, and I am the Prevention Program Manager at Adapt Integrated Healthcare serving Douglas County, Oregon. And the goal of ADAPT's prevention program is really to promote and build safe and healthy communities by preventing risky behaviors such as substance misuse or excessive gambling. And we really do this by identifying risk factors and strengthening protective factors that will reduce one's likelihood of developing a behavioral health problem.
Wonderful. And Allison?
Hi, everyone. My name's Allison Pinkelman. I'm the Public Health Programs Coordinator at a federally qualified health center called Aviva Health in Douglas County. I coordinate our school-based health center and our reproductive health program, and we have the privilege of serving constituents here.
So cool. Okay.
I have to follow up. Mckenzy Schultz, and I am the Program Manager for Creating Community Resilience, which is a collective impact effort in Douglas County that focuses on trauma-informed care. And I work with a lot of the local agencies. And I'm also from Douglas County, so I think that's really important too. I've been in this community for a long time.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, so the reality is today we're doing a show called The Vape Talk. This is part of our podcast for Everyday Epidemics. And it's really more than just a vape talk because we have some really great prevention experts here in the community. And we work alongside each other all the time. I don't know if you guys can tell, but we have a certain rapport with one another. And it's great to work side along such amazing colleagues.
So sweet. Thanks, Mitchell.
Thank you, Mitchell.
Yeah, so today we are going to talk about prevention. We're going to talk about some of the work that we do. We actually have a list of questions that is in a cup. We have questions in a cup. So this segment is now, I've decided it's called Questions in a Cup. And we're going to pull from the cup and we're going to answer a couple of questions.
A couple?
Well, we'll answer like one.
You don't get it? Because it's in a cup. A couple.
That's staying in the edit.
This is why Mckenzy is here.
Here for good vibes and to hold the cup.
Yep.
No, it's okay.
So these questions, I think, are intended for a couple of people, but feel free to chime in. I think we all have a very round expertise and a lot of knowledge. And so, I think it'll be a lot of fun. So let's start with the first one.
Okay,
MC Mckenzy.
So, does letting them try it take the curiosity away or make it worse?
It meaning vaping, to clarify.
Yes.
Or any substance use, probably.
Yeah, I think it could be vaping or any substance.
It could be either, yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think this was intended for me.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about alcohol specifically, but like we're saying, we're talking about any substances in general when it comes to youth being curious. And really, before I answer that question, I just want to note out that curiosity is completely normal, and it's actually a very important part of our learning process. So just because a teen is curious doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to use a substance. We really want to use that opportunity to have a discussion about the substance and why are they curious. It might be that their friends are using, and if so, then we should have that conversation about peer pressure and how we can give them skills to say no or give them an exit in those situations. Are they curious for other reasons, like trying to find a coping skill? If that's the case, then kind of identifying that underlying factor, if it's anxiety or depression or something that's leading to vaping or alcohol use, we want to identify those and have those conversations with our children. So curiosity is normal. We don't want to lean into it and let them drink or vape under like our supervision. Some parents think, oh, well, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it anyways. I'm expecting them to experiment. I want to do it under my household. And the reality is that kind of puts this perception that it's okay to do it.
Yeah.
And if my parents are saying it's okay, then I can do it at home. I can do it at my friend's house. It really doesn't matter where. And it increases their likelihood to engage in substance use anywhere. And while lots of parents might think like my teen doesn't listen to me anyway, so what's the point of having this conversation with them? The truth is lots of research has been done, and parents continue to be the number one reason why teens choose not to use substances. So as a parent, creating those rules and like kind of household expectations really goes a long way in preventing their substance use.
I wanted to add to that too, just back to the curiosity aspect of it. I think we have to acknowledge that in media and marketing and advertising and all of the messages and images youth are exposed to on a daily basis. So like the shows and the movies that they're watching have people vaping and drinking like it's normal daily life for a teenager and that nothing bad happens. I mean, some shows, bad things arise out of it, but not in a, this is a regular thing. This is more of like a dramatic part of the story. And so I think it's important when we are watching something with our youth, when they are watching a show and you see substance use, to have a conversation with them about that this is fiction, this is drama, this is a show. They don't show you the public health concerns or like the reality of substance use. With vaping, they don't show you the long-term impacts of vaping. With drinking or other substances, they don't show you the long-term impacts. They're just showing like the fun aspect of it. And so I think that's always important to be mindful of as a parent or a caregiver or really just an adult, is when you see those messages, just have a conversation, because then it takes kind of the curiosity or the peer pressure away just from media in general. Same thing with advertising. Unfortunately, advertising is everywhere. It's on our phones, it's on our TVs, it's on our laptops, it's on our billboards. Just having a healthy dialogue, I think, goes a long way with prevention and just really taking that curiosity piece out of it, because it is normal, especially when they see it all the time. It's something that they see and want to do because they're seeing other people, whether that's in film or marketing or advertising, use those substances.
I'm curious on all of your sort of aspects. So when we look at specifically vaping and nicotine use, national surveys show that it's declining. But when I talk with students locally here in Douglas County, when I do local surveys, the reality is these things are actually increasing, not just among vaping, but really among nicotine pouches and other types of products. What are you seeing locally around here for other types of drugs? I don't know if you have any idea of, like, do you think it just continuing to increase? Do we have more youth with more substance use problem gambling? Is this becoming a more prevalent issue? Is it about the same? Where are things at?
I guess the biggest thing I want to mention is, with the pandemic, and since the pandemic, I think a lot of capacity for data collection has eroded. And so when we're looking at the data, like, oh, it's gone down. Has it gone down, or has the access to fill out a survey or do this form, or less schools participating in data collection, or less people willing to say that they're using substances? I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. And so I always try to look at the big picture and not just, statistics and data sources. I think that's great to like talk to the community, talk to the youth about what they're seeing. Because when I talk to youth, it's so normal. It's just normalized. Yeah. Vaping in the bathrooms, drinking in the bathrooms, drinking at the school dances. One of the youth that we work with recently said that they're a little frustrated with their school because of the substance use issue. And it's really disheartening to go to school when they're constantly surrounded by it. And so I think that's part of it. You know, when we're looking at data, I think it's important to recognize, but also for that not to be the end all be all of our efforts. Doesn't mean that, you know, the vaping is going down. Maybe nicotine vaping, but there's also a lot of different types of vapes out there.
Yeah.
They also could think there's water. It's just water vapes, which is a big misconception.
Yeah.
They might not actually understand that what they're using has nicotine in it or is considered a vape. So I think that's the other piece of it.
When I look at our like state use data, and again, this is students reporting their own use, the big three, and this has historically always been the big three, is nicotine or tobacco, traditionally is what we've referred as tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana being the three main drugs that kids are engaging in use. And alcohol tends to always be number one when it comes to youth use. Vaping, of course, we saw that trend in recent years. That's gone up. And again, the misconception of vapes are safe compared to cigarettes, and trying to clarify how that it's really the nicotine in the vape or the tobacco that's causing the addiction, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And then the marijuana piece. A lot of the increase in marijuana use comes from our low perception of harm, and that stems from our laws and regulations at the state level saying we're going to legalize marijuana use. And what type of message does that send our kids? It sends the message that it can't be that harmful if they're going to legalize it, right? And so the perception of harm for marijuana use is really, really low compared to alcohol and nicotine even. And so those are type of the concerning things that we always want to identify. And like Mckenzy said, the trend piece is hard because they're always changing the survey questions too. So you can't it's like comparing apples to oranges. You can't really make a direct comparison. But we know that within our county, our students are using at higher rates than even our state numbers. And so, of course, that's concerning and something that, of course, we're all working to try to address.
Yeah. And I think what's great about working in a local community like this is that we're able to go to all the schools. I see you all at the outreach events that we do, and we get to talk with students directly and hands-on and really get a better sense of the data. Like, it's one thing to look at numbers, but it's also one thing to go into schools and to talk to 200 students and be like, oh, so this is what you're seeing, this is what you're feeling. It's much more, I would say, impactful data. If we lived in a really large city, I think that would be much harder to do. But we are very fortunate here in Douglas County to be able to do that.
And one last thing, we're also in the middle of a mental health crisis on top of behavioral health, and the two intertwine so often. And so when we think about using substances or whatever, our coping mechanism is, in that case, it's unhealthy, right? And how that interplays with our mental health really makes the problem a lot more complex than just trying to encourage your kid not to use a substance. Again, going back to that root cause of what is the real reason they're using the substance in the first place.
Yeah. I had one last sort of follow-up to that. I know we're kind of dragging on, but I was curious, communication was a big thing that we talked about, communication with parents. I guess my thing is how do we talk with parents? It's one thing to say, hey, parent, talk to your kid about these things. And the parent goes, okay, great, I should probably do that. That seems reasonable. But then the parent's like, well, what do I say? And how do I communicate with my kid? Maybe I don't know as a parent all of the information. So I guess, what do you tell parents in that situation? How do we deal with those things? I think it seems like a big part of public health.
I would say start first by educating yourself on what the dangers are, why you think it's important that your kids shouldn't be using these substances, because you want to be that source for your kids. And once you're kind of feeling comfortable to have the conversation, so hopefully you're doing that really early on, because these conversations are important to start elementary years, we're talking, before they even think about kind of engaging in any risky behavior. And then when it comes to actually starting the conversation, frequency is key. And coming across that you're not here to kind of harp on them or just give them rules. Don't do drugs, blah, blah, blah. You're coming at them with compassion, caring about their safety, and setting your expectations, but also giving reasons why. We have a house rule that we don't use substances because we care for your safety.
Yeah.
And we don't want addiction to be a problem in your life later. And having the conversations, again, just coming at it with compassion and as frequently as you can. And then I would say, don't try to necessarily sit them down to have a talk, right? That's kind of uncomfortable. And the whole let's have one talk about drugs doesn't really have the impact that we think it might.
Mm-hmm.
Having, again, those regular, consistent conversations in the car on the way home. Maybe you see someone outside smoking a cigarette. You can say, hey, what do you think about that guy smoking a cigarette, right?
Yeah.
Just to try to get the conversation going and really listening to what they have to say and what their experiences are.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think it's time for question number 2.
Perfect. I already pulled one for you, Mitchell. When we're talking about vaping, what exactly is in a vape?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so what isn't a vape? Well, first thing I want to say is vaping is not FDA approved, meaning that between individual vapes, the ingredients could be or will be quite a bit different. So you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. There's a couple of main things in a vape. You have propylene glycol, which is one of the carrier units, and then you have vegetable glycerin. So those two components together, and then usually there's some sort of nicotine, which is that addictive chemical part, and then some sort of flavoring. And then within that, you'll see all kind of the bad things we talk about, which are VOCs, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, nickel, tin, lead, arsenic, all kinds of those things. But really, it's just the 3 things. You have the carrier units, which create the smoke, nicotine, and some sort of flavoring component. So all of those come together to make what is actually in a vape.
Most importantly, no water,
Yeah,
right?
They don't add any water to vape, surprisingly. And so when they say it's just water vapor, it's actually not at all. It's a combination of oils.
And I think we need to touch on all of the flavors. So from my understanding, there's over 8,000 different flavors.
Yeah.
And really the reason that they're putting flavors in vapes is to get youth to use them, right?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So flavors are a big component in what we think gets kids hooked. In fact, in the Oregon legislature right now, there is a proposal that would ban flavors from vapes. Yeah. And this is a big deal because, tobacco companies want to get customers for an entire generation because nicotine is so hard to quit. So we actually run quit classes here. You guys have any idea how successful I am at getting somebody to quit in these quit classes?
25%.
Usually, I think it's a 5 to 10% success rate for tobacco cessation.
Yes.
So I'm gonna guess around that.
So you're all close. You very overestimate my skills. I'm not that good. It's about 3 to 5%. So that's how.
Pretty standard though.
Yeah.
With the research is
Yep.
it's 5% ish success rate for cessation, which is quitting smoking or tobacco use.
And usually multiple attempts, right?
Yeah, it's almost never the first attempt. Yeah, it's certainly several attempts. And that's in combination with quit classes, but also some sort of therapy. Maybe it's a nicotine patch, maybe it's gum, or even a medication to help you quit smoking. So, if you get addicted early on, then these big tobacco companies have you for an entire generation. And then when you later in life, you decide, I don't like this very much. I don't want this to, I understand the harms and now I'm ready to quit. Oh man, it's really hard to quit. And so we think that if we pass this law that would outlaw these flavors, far less youth would start with vaping or nicotine products. Because if you ever tried a nicotine product or just a regular cigarette, doesn't taste very good. You do it the first time, it's like, ugh, that tastes terrible. It is awful. I'm not going to do that again. And that's a big enough barrier to prevent most youth from starting in the first place.
And what about the concept that Big Tobacco is telling us that vapes are the healthy alternative to cigarettes? This was supposed to be intended as a method for adults, right?
Yeah.
But then we've now seen
Yeah.
a lot of unintended consequences. And I don't know that the research actually holds up to this claim anyways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's how big tobacco companies marketed this product. It's like, this is going to help adults quit smoking. And if true, I'm all for innovative new products, and I hope that they work. That would be great. I mean, that would be the best public health invention if we were able to create these vapes that would help people quit smoking. That's just not what we're seeing, though. What we're seeing is that people are switching from cigarettes to vaping, and then maybe using co-using, so they're continuing to use cigarettes and vape, or they use this thing much more often than they would with a regular cigarette because they're accessible. You can smoke inside, and they're just big plumes of smoke, and they're fruity smelling. And so you have people consuming much higher amounts of nicotine than they might otherwise would. And when we look at the number of youth who start using these products, it's astronomical. I mean, these kids who have never used nicotine product before are now trying this and getting addicted to nicotine. But when we look at the number of adults who are using a vape device to quit smoking, the percentages just don't compare. I mean, we have so many more youth starting nicotine addiction than adults actually quitting. So it's just like, this does not work. This is not a good idea.
And big tobacco wins.
Yeah, big tobacco won that. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough world out there, I'll tell you. This prevention game ain't easy. Out there trying to make 3-pointers every day, and we miss all the shots we don't take. So we keep trying and doing things like podcasts and YouTube videos and all the great work that you guys do. So trying to stay on top of the game, but it's tough. It is tough.
Okay, our third question is, what should I say if I drank as a teen myself?
We probably should address this question because that's often what kids are thinking. Oh, my parents did it, so I'll be fine too. Especially parents who often glamorize their young years when they were out drinking and having fun.
Right.
So then it's like, oh, it's my rite of passage, right? I get to do that too. But really, the message we want to send is that, man, if I had someone who talked to me when I was young, who told me the dangers and the risky situations I would put myself in, I definitely would have been better off. And my concern is I don't want you, my child, to be put in those same risky situations. And so that's why we need to have this conversation. Again, I care about your safety. And we want to make sure that, even though I recognize I'm going to be honest about what I may be engaged in as a child, I want better for you.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, it's not to say that people who have used substances or do use substances are doing something that's right or wrong. It's much more complex than that. I think it's all about information and educating people on the risks and the harm that can come from that, because obviously these substances exist, vapes exist, drinking exists, and is legal in our communities for a reason. And
For adults.
For adults.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, it's in our community. It's not like it's a secret. It's not like it's hidden behind closed doors. Like, this is pretty much out in the open. You can go anywhere and see someone smoking or vaping or drinking or whatever it might be. But I think it goes back to that education and having those conversations about the choices that we make, because it's more than just substance use. It could be things like, the relationships that we're in, or the people that we're hanging around, or the things that we want to do with our life. So it's more than just, okay, I drank as a teenager. It's more of having that conversation and that dialogue with your family and with your kiddos, because there's really in my opinion, there's no right or wrong. It's whatever works best for the family, however that conversation happens. Sometimes it happens, and it's not something that we need to demonize people over, or that we need to criticize people over. It does happen. I think just having open, honest communication and just being really supportive, getting down to the root causes, making sure it's not becoming a problem, because going back to youth are curious. It is normal. It is, we see youth trying substances, and we see youth that continue not to use substances. It's not that if they try it once they'll become addicted to it immediately. Of course, there is science to back up that these are addictive substances, and depending on who you are and the environment you're in and your risk factors, yes, you can become addicted to substances. And we don't really know. It's not like a pure science of like, oh, well, because of X, Y, and Z, you're absolutely going to get addicted to alcohol. That's not how it works. But it's the messaging of like, this is the risk. This is what can happen. Here's some other things that can also happen because of substance use, whether that's, being impacted in school, whether that's drinking and driving and, a car accident happening, losing friends over it. So really just going back to looking at the risk, looking at the impacts and having that healthy conversation so youth don't see those negative impacts and they don't rely on a vape every day in the bathroom at school and, it becomes a problem. That's just my kind of advice for parents is happens. A lot of people have personal experience with substance use and they're here fine today, and that's great. And that, recovery is really important, but, prevention is great. We don't want people to even develop a substance use disorder at all. That's the goal that we're all here for, is substance use happens, but it doesn't necessarily become a disorder. And I would love for people to talk about that too. I don't know if Sidnee or Allison or Mitchell, you want to talk about the difference between just using a substance and then also a disorder, because they're very different.
Yeah, I can touch on that. And it's probably easiest to talk about it when it comes to adult use, because we know that a lot of these substances are legal to use as an adult. And people will often say, there's always studies coming out, 1 glass of wine at night can actually be beneficial to my health. So there's a level of drinking, for example, that you can do that wouldn't have harmful effects, long term at least. And then you can start creeping up a little bit more into the binge drinking and heavy drinking categories where you're drinking more often or more per setting. And then you start to see some of these consequences. When you develop an alcohol use disorder is really characterized by your inability to stop drinking and how it's impairing your social life and your job and your financial situation. These are characteristics of an individual with an alcohol use disorder, and it could be any substance. Substance use disorder is just kind of encompassing of all of those. So that's kind of the difference. And I would say the hard part really is knowing where you are on that spectrum, because it's very easy, especially with alcohol use, to go from a healthy level of drinking or an unharmful level of drinking to creeping into that binge drinking category, or even further on to a substance use disorder. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Rethink the Drink campaign that Oregon Health Authority is putting on. And that's really their main message is it's not don't drink. It's
Right.
How do we recognize our level of drinking, and are we aware of how much we're drinking? Do we know that this fourth drink puts us into a binge drinking category tonight, and how that might impact us health-wise? So that's kind of a surface level on the differences between use and then misuse and substance use disorder. But I do want to let everyone know that adults with substance use disorder, 90% of adults with a substance use disorder started using substances before the age of 18.
Right.
So that early use, delaying that early use, that early initiation, is one of our biggest protective factors we can do for our kids. And so thinking again about that education, that peer refusal skill, one of the biggest things you can do is model the healthy behavior yourself as a parent. And this doesn't, again, mean stop drinking. Maybe it means I'm not going to drink in front of my kids because I don't want them to think that this is an acceptable thing for them to engage in. And so being just really aware of how our actions impact our kids, they are absorbing everything from us. Mm-hmm. We are their number one teacher, role model, and kind of that really can empower you, right, to help guide them into the right direction.
And going back to, that 90% of adults with substance use disorder were using substances before the age of 18, they were regular users, right? Like, it's not that they tried it once. It's that they we're using substances at an early age, we're always, again, going back to public health and like trying to delay that initial, age of regular use. Because it is common for kids to try something. And the goal as a parent, I think, or what I hope for parents, is that if that happens, your child or who you're taking care of will come to you and say, hey, I tried this, I didn't like it, or I did like it, and having those conversations, because we're always trying to delay regular use. We're trying to educate them on the harms, so that way it doesn't become a consistent problem, part of daily life. And I think when we're talking about vapes, I don't know very many people that are using vapes socially. Every once in a while, they have vapes, they carry it with them everywhere. Or same thing with cigarettes, smoke breaks, smoke areas, like those are integrated into our society, unfortunately. And so, I think alcohol and marijuana and those things, when we're talking about prevention, it can look a little different than vapes, because it is very rare, in my opinion, for someone to not be addicted to nicotine if they're using it regularly.
Yeah, regular use really is the key. The problem is when it comes to the adolescent brain, we know it's not developed yet, right? Until you're 25, your brain is still working to make those connections. And it's that prefrontal cortex, that front part of our brain, it's responsible for that decision making, that judgment, really the skills that are going to help kids identify, oh, I'm taking this substance, it's exciting, but I'm not also understanding that this could have a long-term consequence. And so that risk of addiction actually can happen faster among adolescents. And that's why that, delay initial regular use, but be careful too, because that initial use, it can easily add on to the second use and the third use. And with the substances these days, especially with vapes and how much nicotine is in them, it can be very quick for some youth to easily develop that addiction. There's so many facets that can influence one's likelihood of actually developing that addiction. But that is something that we definitely know, is that early use can have a huge influence on whether the actual disorder occurs later in life.
So just for parents out there, the goal is to prevent all of that from happening, but it takes an open dialogue. And that if your kid comes to you and says, oh, I tried a vape at school, I think the biggest thing with parents is don't freak out. It's really hard if you have to take a deep breath and take a walk around the block before you have that conversation. Doesn't mean that your child automatically has an addiction. But just be aware that, yes, for youth, it can happen a lot faster because their brains are developing and they don't have the same, different brains, capacities and things are still developing. But, just for parents out there, I know if my kid came to me and was like, oh my gosh, I tried it, I'd be like, oh my gosh, do they have a disorder? It doesn't happen usually that quickly, but just being aware that it can develop rather quickly, but your goal is to be informed before it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And I think with nicotine, it's interesting because we talked about alcohol and how there's sort of this middle ground to where, you're drinking and it's not a problem, and you're an adult, you can enjoy an adult beverage, it's totally fine. And there's a level where you cross that threshold and now it becomes unhealthy. And it's been unhealthy because it could be a lot of reasons, but mainly, it's going to affect your organs, your body, have bad health outcomes. And with nicotine, that range of what's healthy and unhealthy is minimal because you don't use and then addiction, and there's a tiny little band that exists. And so, you touch on a lot of this, but sorry, my throat is okay. And you've touched on a lot of this, but the reality is that students who make it through high school and really, the age of 25 don't go on and become nicotine users in the future. There's a couple exceptions if you work in really difficult, stressful jobs, military, police officers, things like that. Food service is a big one. But generally for the general public, for the general person, you make it through those age, you might try a cigar, you might try something, another nicotine product, but you're not going to become a lifelong nicotine user. And nicotine itself is relatively not super harmful. Like I'm not trying to go out there and be like, this is going to kill you. Like it doesn't. It takes years. It takes years of substance use and abuse in order for those long-term effects to happen. If you use cigarettes, you smoke cigarettes for 20, 30, 40 years, then you have emphysema, cancer, lung disease, all these other health issues that are really horrible, really horrible. And the biggest thing that I stress is just so hard to quit. It's so hard to quit. And I know being in school and not really being able to comprehend that. I think for me, I'm a math guy, so I can see the numbers. I see the quit classes. I'm like, oh, we're not very successful. For me, I was like, oh, I'm a strong guy. Have a lot of willpower. I can overcome this. And the reality is with nicotine addiction, it's addiction. It's not you. You can have as much willpower as you want, but it's still going to be tough to overcome. We have to become stronger regulations or rules. I mean, what kinds of things do we think about, and what happens? Like, what is public health and lawmaking and legislation? Like, what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I haven't had a lot of experience writing the laws myself, a big part of public health is advocating for the constituents that you serve, as you know in your work, as you both know in your work. And something that is so egregious when we're looking at nicotine and tobacco and vape advertising is they so often are curtailing specifically to children. Something that has recently passed legislatively is that they are no longer allowed to use Disney characters, Nickelodeon characters. They are no longer allowed to use like certain flavors like blue raspberry. However, they can still make them look like pens. They can still make them look like fun colors, weird shapes. There are kinds of vapes that look like highlighters. So that's a really, really big public health crisis when there are teachers who may not even be able to identify that they're in their classroom. And these students are inhaling these toxins and they're sharing them with their friends, which is a great way to share STIs as well. But that's a different discussion. But as we're looking at the normalization and the social supports that are coming from vaping with their friends, not being able to use legislation or FDA approvals to regulate these toxins that children are investing. Children are they're not ingesting them.
They're ingesting them. Yeah.
Cool. That children are ingesting is putting the youth at risk.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
I think that's a complicated question in public health because I think a lot of individuals who work in public health have this shared responsibility and this hope and this altruism to contribute to society in a positive way. But ultimately, you have to have hope. So it can make me feel sad or angry or anxious, but I have to regulate and like take a step back and look at what is actionable. How can I reach out to my legislators? How can I reach out to my senators? Who can I talk to at the schools to educate them on this is what vapes look like now. They don't look like little boxes anymore. They can look like a pen. They can look like a pencil. They might be in their fake Apple Watch. They could be anything. So I think having actionable items helps go past the feelings.
Have you guys been in like a convenience store recently where they're selling vapes or like liquor and just looked at like product placement, the colors of the products, the words that they all the time. It's just
it's crazy.
It's concerning.
I mean, these are like, they actually just put these places that are kid friendly, kid accessible, make them look like kid colors. I mean, this is certainly predatory marketing and tactics for sure. I know it's something that we fight back against a lot, especially through legislative measures. We do these undercover retail operations where we send in minors, and when we send in minors to store, these minors look like 12. They don't look like adults. They don't have beards. These are young people, and they still get sold to. So underage sales happens. It happens in our community. And it's something that we're working on trying to fix, but you can only do so much, right? So yeah, I don't know. For me, I feel like Allison said, I'm still hopeful. I think we have to be altruistic and be like, we can do stuff, but on the other hand, there's always two sides to a coin. And when we pass things through legislation, it might hurt other people. So, for example, there are people who do vape, who do enjoy vape, enjoy vaping, I guess is the verb. And passing these laws is going to maybe harm them in some way where they can't enjoy that thing. So I do recognize that by passing legislation, there's other people who are going to be unhappy with that. I think we try to say what's going to be the best benefit, weigh the risks or the pros versus the cons, and how are we going to get the most amount of pros for the most amount of people.
So speaking to that, Mitchell, I think it's actually really interesting when we talk about different laws being passed or public health campaigns. One that recently came to my mind, or a video that I just saw on social media actually, was when seatbelts were first required to be worn. And it's funny because like now we look back and it's outrageous that people would feel this way. I could never imagine not wearing a seatbelt in the car. But I was watching this video, and I hope everyone looks it up after this. People were really upset. They were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they were to require us to do this. Like, this is absolutely outrageous. So it just takes time, I think, for it to become normalized. I think that's when we're talking about legislation and public health campaigns and things, it's to keep people safe and healthy. And the same thing goes with banning flavors and certain marketing and advertising tactics that big tobacco does. It might seem outrageous to us now, but in 20 years, I promise we will look back and go, I can't believe we did things like that. That's so archaic. So just to add to that, it's all about perception.
Yeah, and we see that throughout time too. I do this presentation about kind of the intro of public health, and we talk about Dr. John Snow, who discovered that they were dumping raw sewage near our drinking water. And then he wanted to pass some legislation to say, hey guys, like, let's not put our raw sewage in our drinking water. And everybody's like outraged. Oh my goodness, I couldn't be bothered to, move it down the street instead of right next to this. But now we look at today and we're like, we have to have plumbing. Are you kidding me? If you dump sewage there, it's an outcry.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about prevention, of course, and when it comes to substance use, trying to delay that initial use among youth. And so I do want to come back to this concept, though, because we know as much as we try, there are going to be kids that use. And as a parent, one of the things that we can do is recognize the signs that our children have started engaging in substance use. And so maybe Mitchell or someone else, if you want to chime in, what should some of these signs be that we're on the lookout for so we can do that like early intervention to prevent that addiction from developing?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to tobacco products, and then maybe we'll pass it on to maybe some other substances. Again, before we even answer that question, it's always good to have a conversation early before we get to that point where they might be using these things. As early as 4th, 5th, 6th grade, that's a great time to start having these prevention conversations and just saying, hey, you're probably going to see this in school. Here's my expectation, and here's some tools you can do or to use to maybe avoid those things, or how to deal with that peer pressure if it comes up. But if you're a parent out there, and some signs you might look for are, one, your student fruity smelling flavors in the house, in the room. That's typically not normal. And so if you had an air freshener, maybe, but generally that's going to be a sign of a student who's vaping, a student who maybe has kind of a different mood change. I get it's tough to know. These are really subtle signs. I think teens have a lot of mood changes, but a change in mood or attitude can be a big indicator, and it might be a good time to say, hey, like, is everything okay? What's going on? Can we chat? How's school going? So regular communication is good. And then the other thing that we do see, especially with youth who are using these things more regularly, increased signs of anxiety, increased signs of depression. So those can be contributing factors. Now, you might not vape at all and have increased anxiety, depression. So again, these are loose signs, but those are just a couple that you can look for. I think the other thing is to educate yourself as a parent on what these things look like. If you've never vaped or used these type of tobacco products before, right now, one of the most popular products among high schoolers and middle schoolers is a product called Zyn. There's also other brands, Velo, Rogue, On, just to name a few. And these are small nicotine pouches. So you might see these things and go, I don't know what this is. This looks harmless. So I really encourage you to reach out and say, what do these look like? Look up pictures. We talked about how vapes can come in all different sizes and things like highlighters. So just knowing that, this is what they look like, this is what they are, can help you see signs in your student as a parent.
Yeah, I definitely think the behavior change is like one of the key indicators. And again, it's hard with teens because, you know, they're going through a lot and they often can have different behaviors. But the kind of withdrawing from their normal interests, maybe there's someone who's an athlete and now they're not interested in going to practice. Maybe they're like typically a really strong student, but their grades are slipping. Maybe they are someone who like typically is responsible with their money, but then all of a sudden they're asking you for a lot more money and you're not sure what they're doing with that money.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily one thing that will help you identify it, but like if you start keeping track and you're noticing 2 or 3 things, that's a really good time to not accuse your child of doing something that's risky, but like have a conversation. Hey, I noticed that you're not really into going to soccer practice anymore. Want to tell me more about that? Or somehow opening up that dialogue. So
I'd also say too, like you don't also have to be a parent. Maybe you're a trusted adult, a family member. It's okay to check in with your relatives and your family about these things. Sometimes parents, especially in Douglas County, are struggling. A single mom, working many jobs, trying to make ends meet. It's really hard to be an attentive parent when you've got a lot of stressors going on. So it takes a community to overcome these issues. And so it's okay if you're a trusted adult to see these things, and you can have that conversation too in a way that's appropriate and friendly, and approach it with empathy. But I think it's not just for parents. Other adults out there should use this information too.
I just wanted to.
I was just going to say, and friends too.
Yeah.
Friends are oftentimes the first one to notice a change in the other friend's behavior.
I was just going to add on that another large indicator is if your child or a youth or your friend or family member hasn't normally exhibited behaviors around oral fixations, and all of a sudden you notice that they constantly have to be having gum, they're constantly jittering, they're constantly picking at their skin when that wasn't the case before, that can be a really high indicator that they're either utilizing vapes or nicotine or tobacco or other substances. And that can be a really big indicator as well. And also a change in oral hygiene is normally a great indicator. So if there's someone who has normally struggled to brush their teeth and they now are doing it consistently, or vice versa, if they used to brush their teeth very well, they used to have good oral hygiene and now it's lacking, that's also a really good indicator of new use.
Yeah, I think going back to that, I would just going back to like it takes a village. I'm not going to say like with certainty, but dental care, a dentist might notice these signs in your child. Like it's pretty clear usually if someone's using tobacco products because it does have a pretty big impact on their teeth and oral health. The one thing I also wanted to add too, and this is just general to any substance really, but and this is really hard too, because especially with teenagers, this is pretty normal behavior anyways, but if they start to get really secretive, about their backpack or their room or their car or some sort of, maybe it's like this shoebox that sits on their nightstand or something, like if you start to see them kind of have like these weird, like they're hiding their backpack in the trunk of their car kind of situation stuff, it's important to kind of just as a parent, be mindful of that. It could be a lot of different other things. It could be a substance. It could be, a second cell phone. I mean, there's like a lot of things, that youth might want to keep secret from their parents or hide from their parents. But that's just something to be mindful of. If this is a recent change in their behavior, or they get really upset when you try to get something out of their backpack or something, just be mindful of that. Because they might have a vape there, they might have alcohol, or other substances that they're trying to hide. That might, as a parent, might not strike you as the place to hide it, but it's because it's some place that you probably don't frequent a lot. They're not going to hide it in the kitchen drawer.
Yeah, and I think a big thing too is we're not saying this to scare parents or make anybody afraid about this. This is really just an opportunity to learn, to be on the lookout, to be prepared. Because most parents and students are going to have a time in their life when they're exposed to these products. They're legal. They're out there. Many people can get it. It's pretty easy to get your hands on them. And so that's why it all comes back to the communication, to conversations. We're not trying to scare you. It's like, oh, wow, you're going to have all this stuff. You have to now go through your student stuff. Like, no, like, I think as a parent, it's okay to respect privacy, but having open communication and open dialogue is the best way to prevent long-term worsening health outcomes from addiction or substance use, or as Sidnee talked about, mental health crisis is really big right now. So having conversations can help all of those things.
So this is great. We've talked about the prevention aspect, the early intervention, trying to identify signs. Let's do, say, one of our kids needs actual help. We have symptoms that are suggesting they're regularly using, and we want to make sure that they can get the skills from a counselor or a therapist to quit their use before that really long-term addiction might develop. Now, in Douglas County, we do have decent resources. We've got ADAPT, of course, and Aviva Health, and lots of other healthcare agencies who are here to support. But coming from a rural county, maybe Allison can chime in. How does being in a rural area like Douglas County impact our ability to serve youth, adults, any individual in this manner?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a bit of context, I'm not from this county. I was raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, very big city, lots of resources. I went to college in Salt Lake City, another big city with a lot of resources. So moving here, I was expecting there to be nothing. I was expecting maybe one clinic, maybe two if we were lucky. And luckily, we have 2 federally qualified health centers in Douglas County, just like Sidnee mentioned, and ADAPT is specialized in substance use and treatment, and Aviva is more clinical. But as we're looking at the challenges that we face when we're trying to help get resources to kiddos, one of the biggest challenges is that a lot of folks don't have transportation, so they may not be able to come to meetings or be able to access meetings. And you may say, oh, well, they can hop on a Zoom meeting. Not everyone has internet access in these counties, particularly when we're looking at our more rural areas like Diamond Lake or Reedsport that are oftentimes left out. But something that I think this community does really well from the 3 years that I've noticed being here is there is this collective resiliency and resourcefulness in getting individuals help when they need it. So if there is a kiddo, let's use the school where our school-based health center is, for example, Roseburg High School. If we know a student is struggling, not only is ADAPT Integrated Healthcare able to wrap around them, but Aviva is able to wrap around them as well. And we can then connect them to Douglas Public Health Network, or DPHN for short. And being able to have that wraparound care and offer that to them in a rural area where sometimes confidentiality can be hard because a lot of people know everyone, being able to make sure that youth have this access to care that their parents won't find out about if they don't want them to is so vital.
Okay, so this is the last bucket poll for the hour, and then I think we'll see where else the conversation leads us. But this might be it. What's she? Okay, let's see here. So, what exactly is trauma-informed care?
That's a really tough question because it's so broad. But really, trauma-informed care is actually an approach. It's an approach to how we work with people, how we work with clients, whether that's healthcare or education, or really just in the community. And so trauma-informed care, I mean, really, if you break it down, trauma-informed. So we'll break that down first. So being trauma-informed is acknowledging and realizing that people have been traumatized by various things or happenings in their life, whether that was something that was violent, or maybe it was some sort of, dynamic in their home life, or something that happened during their childhood. There's a couple of different types of traumas that, I'm not going to go into today. But being trauma-informed is realizing that people are impacted by their trauma. People are impacted by the things that have happened to them. It can change their behaviors. It can change the way that they view the world, the way they view themselves. And so when we look at trauma-informed care, it's specifically in healthcare, when we're working with clients, realizing that they might have different health, risk factors or concerns based on their trauma. So we know that there's a lot of research out there that shows that there's a correlation between certain traumas and certain, health conditions. One of the big ones is the ACE study, or the Adverse Childhood Experience study that was done. And I'll turn that over to Allison because I know that you know quite a bit about that study as well. But, that's just one example of how trauma can impact someone's health. And so as a healthcare provider, it's important to acknowledge that. And when we think of trauma-informed care, we also think of like the 6 principles of trauma-informed care, which I encourage everyone to look into. There's a lot of different ways you can incorporate it into your life or into your practice. But really just, understanding that people have had experiences that can impact who they are and, the certain health factors that they have. But Allison, you want to talk a little bit more about the ACE study in particular?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to look at Mitchell just because it's easier on my neck, but I'm not ignoring you. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the ACEs study, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, it was done far before any of us were born. It was a longitudinal study that was done over 10 years, and it studied 10 exposures to what they called the ACEs, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences. If you're curious on what those are, I'm sure we can link resources down below.
For sure.
Sorry, post-op people. But those 10 experiences, if you experienced one of them, you get a score of 1. If you experience 2 of them, you get a score of 2, so on and so forth. Within that study, they found a dose-response relationship. If you don't know what a dose-response relationship is, hopefully we can show a little graph right here, but as you put gas into a car, hopefully if your car is working correctly, your car can go farther. And that's that little dose-response relationship. So they found a clear correlation between having high ACEs, which in this study, it's any ACE number over 4, and smoking tobacco. And that correlation was also found in other ways, including higher chances of having substance use disorder, higher chances of being in an abusive or intimate partner violence relationship, being more likely to be an alcoholic. So that study is really interesting when we're looking at trauma-informed care and being able to understand that how people were raised and what they were exposed to as children actually has long-term effects, not only on their risk as an individual and in their relationships, but in their risk for being likely to vape or being likely to use substances like tobacco or alcohol. And that's super interesting.
Yeah, and just knowing too that just because, I hope you do look into the ACE study and what the ACEs are. Again, not to scare anyone, because it can feel like really overwhelming, because a lot of people in our community have higher ACE scores. Does not mean that like all of these horrible health outcomes are going to happen. It means that when you look at a population as a whole, there's a higher risk. But there are things that we can do. They're called protective factors or resilience factors, where, people having healthy attachment and belonging to other people, a sense of community, individual capabilities. There's a lot of things that people can do to prevent the outcome of having a lot of trauma or adverse childhood experiences, which is, they evaluated 10 different types of trauma. And so just to put that out there, that doesn't mean that you're going to be a smoker, you're going to be addicted to a drug. It just means that you have, that population has a higher risk. And so especially for healthcare providers, I think it's important to know not that you should be asking people about their trauma, not that you should be like, okay, what's your ACE score? And then I'll diagnose you. It's not about that. It's just about recognizing that people that you're working with and people in the community have personal experiences that do put them at a higher heightened risk. Or if you're already working with someone that has developed that, like say you're a substance use counselor or something like that, that they could have an extensive traumatic background that can contribute to that and should be acknowledged, or at least considered when you're talking about a treatment plan and things like that. It's more than just, someone tried alcohol and then they became an alcoholic. Like there's a lot more that goes into that. And so just being mindful that, people are very complex and their experiences can impact their brain development and, some of the things that they're at risk for.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining this week of Everyday Epidemics. This was a very enlightful and eye-opening episode, And I'm so lucky to work with these wonderful colleagues who really do make a difference. I mean, every day your work in the community is making difference, is saving lives, is helping people on a path of recovery and more informed approaches. So now is when Mckenzy tells us a joke for her stand-up. What do you think about people who gaslight?
I think they're lit.
That's the joke.
Do like
Right,
a
done.
drum set right here.
Honestly, that was perfect.
That's good. Okay, yeah, so that's it for the episode. So do you guys want to say anything?
Check out our agency resources below. Very much. Below. Boop, boop.
If you want to learn more about tobacco and nicotine and addiction, you can also check out this video right here, which is all about tobacco advertising with Dr. Robert Jackler. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next month.